Okay, it's also transcribing. Great. So I believe everyone can see my screen, correct? Great. So on the right-hand panel, we have some Blender shortcuts here. So this is taken from a YouTube tutorial that I learned most of what I know from. Some of them are helpful, some of them are less so. I'm going to go through pretty much everything I typically use to build something. So these are the building blocks that are going to help you do whatever you need to do. Okay. So this is a file. It is our Faraday cage file that I believe is shared with most of you guys on our Teams page. I can also send this out. So this is much more complicated than the simple block that opens whenever you create a new file. But I think this is going to be really helpful when you're trying to visualize things. So there's a couple key things. So in this top right-hand corner, you can see there are 4 circles. So the first one changes everything to a wireframe. The second one views everything as a solid. Everything is in grayscale on this view setting. This one shows everything in color. And this one shows your final rendered version. So that includes any light sources you have and whether or not your shadows are on or off. So some other important things on this right-hand side. So this is a list of all of my objects. So you can see there's some that you that aren't selected in this collection. So collections are an easy way to organize things because you can group, for example, everything in the Faraday cage. So I can turn off my phone, turn back on my phone. So this little eyeball controls what is visible to you as a user, but it does not control what is rendered as an image. So this little camera, you see how nothing changed on my screen? Um, yes, that's how that views. When I finally go to render it, you're going to see that there's no phone there. So whenever you're silly with this, it's a simple thing to just make the eye and the camera the same setting so that you know the way you're viewing things is the way that they'll render. Um, so rendering is just essentially making something into an image. Um, let's now go over some of the basic kind of ways to move around in Blender. So you have a center mouse button, and when you click that, you can move your mouse left or right, and that moves your view. If you scroll backwards or forwards, you can zoom in or out. And then if I hold Shift and then click with my mouse button and then slide, my view moves. If I don't hold down my mouse button, nothing happens. The center mouse button. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. We're not going to save any changes. Okay, so this is how everything will automatically load in for you the first time you open Blender. This is the classic cube. It automatically gives you one. So there's on the top, you'll see that there's a million different tabs. There's modeling, sculpting, UV editing, animation, compositing, geometry nodes. I am only going to show you one tab today, and that is layout. And that is because everything I do in layout. Yes, you can use all of these things to get into more finer detail, but for the most part, you're probably not going to need it. My advice is if you're trying to do something that's more highly specific, look up a YouTube short on how to do that exact thing. So for example, on the previous image I had for you guys, I have a mesh, so I had to figure out how to use a lot more of these modifiers, etc. Okay. So we're going to start by just moving our cube. So if I want to move my cube, there's two things I can do. I can either press G and move my mouse around. And if I click, it stays. And if I press G again and hit escape, it reverts back to where you picked it up from, which is really helpful when you realize that you've made a mistake. Let's actually, so there's another way that you can move it, and that is on this right-hand side, you want to be in the orange object box, and this gives you a finer focus on your specific location. So I can type in coordinate numbers, and that brings you to an exact space. So that's exactly where it started. You can also rotate it relative to the x-axis, relative to the y-axis, or relative to the z-axis. Another thing you can do, actually, I think another way you can do that is you can click R and spin around. So this is a lot more free form, but if you want to make it less free form, you can hit X. So, and that will rotate it only along your x-axis, or Y, only along your y-axis, or Z, only along your z-axis. So this is really helpful when maybe you don't know the exact coordinates, but you know what you want it to look like. So just for reference, that was R, and then I used my X, Z, and Y buttons. Okay. Now, again, in shortcuts, we're going to try S. So S controls your size. And so for pretty much anything that we do in this, you have X, Z, or Y. So these are all done on your keyboard. Alternatively, you can change this with numbers. So when you want something to be the same diameter but a different length, or like or etc. Okay. I'm gonna pause for a second. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. So I'm going to show you guys how essentially to generate your bath and your pipette, because those are probably the things that you guys are going to use the most for making papers, etc. So in order to get rid of this, I'm just going to hit delete. Get rid of it pretty easily. Now there is a shortcut, so I'm going to hold Shift and press A, and that opens up this menu. Hold on, I'm going to do that again. So there's a couple of different things that you can add into it. You can add a mesh, which is what I would recommend you use. So there's planes. So these are two-dimensional objects. Circle is also a two-dimensional object. Your cube is three-dimensional. So is your sphere, and then your cylinder, cone. And then they have a torus as well. So for the most part, I stick to this mesh plane. You can also do curves, surfaces, meatball, text, which I have never found to be helpful. And then there's image. Image can be really helpful because you can add in like a picture, and you can add it in as a plane. And that will enable you to pull something that maybe you built in PowerPoint to get the finer details in, and then overlay that onto your object. And so it doesn't give you anything three-dimensional, but it allows you to do finer details without having to worry about working in 3 dimensions, which can be very difficult. So let's start by adding our cylinder. Okay, so this is my lovely cylinder. And now I'm going to look at my camera view. So you can add as many cameras as you'd like. Currently, my camera is stationed here. And if I click on this toggle the camera view button, it will show me the perspective from my camera. So this is really helpful because if I'm looking at it from this direction, well, my image is not going to render from this perspective. It will only render from the perspective of your active camera. So if I right click on this, you see the set active camera button. That's how you select which camera you have active in a scene. So when you hit this render button, it will render from the perspective of your active camera. This can be helpful because maybe you want two different perspectives of the same scene. And so instead of having to build it multiple times, you can set up two cameras. So that way you don't have to necessarily change any of those finer details. You can, or like move the camera and then have to refine the perspective as well. Okay. So I have my lovely cylinder, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a hole in it. So how I'm going to do that is I need to first look at what mode I'm in. So I'm in object mode. So in this mode, I can select between anything that's in my collection. So for my camera, currently my light, or my cylinder. I need to go from object mode into edit mode. So this highlights all of the features of your cylinder. So it breaks it down into easily identifiable points that you can move. So if we keep in mind the same shortcuts, I can grab a point, drag it all the way over here, and it maintains continuity with the other points it was connected to. If I want to select multiple points, I'm going to drag across, and it will select anything that is in view from that perspective. There is also a way to, instead of go point by point, you can go line by line. So if I hit shift and I click on multiple, I can select half of these, then, bring that out. If I wanted to do that, but I only wanted to move along the x-axis, so that way I didn't have a height differential, I can do that as well. And then what I think is the most important is the face view. So that is this face mode. It's generally speaking, I won't use lines. I use face and I use vertex select. So the first thing we're going to do with this is we're going to inset a face or poke a face. And so I like to use the right click. So there's poke face. So this is going to separate everything into like a central point, which isn't very helpful, at least so I found. But if you inset a face, it will take the shape, like the outer edge, and you can bring it in. And then from here, if I wanted to, I can bring it down and make kind of an empty space. But you'll notice how this is like very one-dimensional, kind of flat. So what I tend to do is I'll inset a face again. And so this one will be thinner. I'll move that down. And so now I have a well instead of just like an empty sphere or empty cylinder. And so this kind of keeps everything a little more three-dimensional, which is my personal preference. Another thing you can do is if you want to make it look more natural, people will purposefully like introduce like imperfections as well. Not particularly necessary. Another thing you'll notice about this is how like everything looks very lined, which is not necessarily the look you're going for when you're generating these images. A simple way of handling that is by right-clicking and clicking Shade Smooth. And so this will kind of play an illusion, you still have all those edges. So then I go into edit mode, and I click, I can still move that point, that individual point. The point hasn't moved. It is just a viewpoint shift, which can be really helpful. It makes life pretty easy. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do for our well is we're going to say, okay, well, this is plastic. What color do I want to change this to? So it's usually plastic, or maybe I can just give it a contrasting color. So I'm going to go over here on this right panel to material. So this little red button, and then I have to create a new material. So there's a couple of like simple pieces here. The base color is the absolute easiest to change. You can darken, lighten, and select. So I want to go for like a brown. So if I darken that, because we are still in the viewport shading, it's not going to show me anything. But if I go here to like our color view, I can see how that would look. You can also make things look more metallic, which kind of makes it bronzy. Like that's what they mean when they mean metallic. Roughness, I believe, changes the way the light reflects off of it, like mathematically. And then alpha changes whether or not it's like completely opaque. So an alpha of 1 means it's completely not transparent, it's completely opaque. If you decrease that, light can pass through, and it kind of gives it this like digital feel almost. We'll make use of that in a minute. Okay, so we have our cylinder. Now I'm going to fill that with water, what I think looks like water. Okay, and so if I were to to add another thing, so I have to hit Shift and then A, and then my panel comes up again. If I add something else from the mesh, it's going to add at this little red point. So in order to change where that is, I can click over here on the cursor, and I can try and go right about there. Of course, the problem with this is it is, in fact, three-dimensional, so it's a little hard to get exactly what you're thinking about. But the great news is with all the other features, it's really easy to move it after you made it. So I'm going to go ahead and add a UV sphere on top of that. I'm going to center it using my object mode around 0, 0. And so now it's completely overlaid. I kind of like where it is height-wise. I'll move it a little down maybe. And then my only goal is to kind of make a little bump there, right? So if I go from my perspective view, maybe that's a little too high. I'm going to lower it a little using my kind of Z-Fine feature. There we go. Okay. Next, I'm going to change the color of it. We'll make it blue, because it's going to be our liquid. So I went to our material base color. And then, of course, shade it smooth, right-click shade smooth, because it just makes everything look better, in my opinion. Okay. So these are our kind of first components. The next thing I'll show you guys is our nanopipette. So I'm going to use this cursor here. I don't like to have it in cursor mode because sometimes you click and it's suddenly all the way down into infinity. But we're gonna set this up, hit Shift, and then I like to use a cylinder because I think it's a good base object. If it's supposed to be three-dimensional in a bubble shape, I'll use a sphere, modulate that. If it's supposed to be like any sort of if there's supposed to be anything remotely circular, life is easier when you have this feature. Okay. There's another, actually, I'll show it to you in a minute. Get to that. Okay. So I like to center everything around 0, 0, or whatever you end up choosing your starting location is. And then let's kind of push this up here. So in order to move, I'm clicking that middle mouse button, scrolling. Out. Okay. So our nanopipette's supposed to be a lot smaller than our bath. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this down by making your X and Y the same. You're able to make it thin without compromising the length. Maybe let's even make it a little smaller. We'll do 0.2. Cool. Okay. So now I have my my base cylinder. You'll see that because I have my cylinder clicked on, that's what's selected in my right-hand menu. This is outlined in orange, and I'm in object mode, so if I click on something else, I get something else. But I want to have my cylinder selected before I go into edit mode because it'll automatically show me the features of this, but nothing else. So if I try and click over here, it does nothing. Also, clicking between these on the right panel while you're in edit mode isn't very helpful. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is make this pointy. So in order to do that, I need to reduce the area of only one of these two sides. So I can select all of these edge points, and if I hit S, size, I can make that narrow. But that doesn't really look like a nanopipette because our nanopipettes are typically have a long end and then they come to a point. So they don't taper all the way through. So in order to essentially better handle this, I'm going to go to face mode. I'm going to click on anything on the cylinder, and then I'm going to press A, which is going to automatically select all my faces. I'm then going to hold Shift and deselect the top and bottom because I don't need to do this to them. So then I'm going to right click and hit what's called subdivide. Now this has automatically broken all these spaces into two divisions. So you see this new orange line. This new orange line means that now this space is separate from this space, which can be very helpful. If I Control Z, go back, subdivide again. So in order to change the number of times it's subdivided all those spaces, there's this panel that shows up on the right-hand side that says subdivide on top. If I want to increase the number of subdivisions, you can do that. For our purposes, 1 is sufficient. And I'll show you why. So I'm going to grab my center vertices. It's Shift. Okay. In order to, so because I only have one side in view, if I highlight this, the back end also doesn't also get highlighted. So in order to highlight both sides, I have to hit Shift and then highlight what was not previously selected. You can also hit Control Z to unselect certain things. Okay. So the top of my nanopipette is typically longer than the taper. So I'm going to grab these and I'm going to just move these down a bit. Go about there. And then I'm going to select all of my vertices at the base. If you miss even one, well, actually, I can show you what happens if you miss even one. Let's try that. So if I now size, oh no. Size, there we go. If I reduce that down, suddenly doesn't look very pretty now, does it? I go ahead and select all of them, and then I hit S, it tapers it down. That kind of looks like our standard nano pipette. So some other things you can do. So I could, for example, Control C, Control V, and now I have two of these cylinders. Now they're automatically spawned in the same spot, so they're overlaid. And for some reason, the one that you have grabbed and is still your original, I believe, by default. So my plan is to I'm going to do something I haven't done before, which is let's just reduce this just a tiny bit in size. And I'm going to make this smaller one blue. Right now you can't see anything because it's not visible. Then I'm going to select my outer one, and I'm going to make that gray by using my material, my base color. I'm just going to make it a little darker, and then I'm going to start to reduce the alpha like I had talked about, which controls how see-through something is. So you can see as I make my alpha higher, you can't see any blue. As I reduce it, you can start to see it through. So we'll go to about there. And then once again, shade smooth. Life is better in that way. Okay, we're gonna sorry, a lot of the shortcuts are similar. So if you just hit Z, you'll see that pop up. Okay, so I don't want to just move one, I want to move both. So I can select them both up here, and it'll still select them on my image. Okay, now let's look at how it's viewed from here. Not bad. So this inner box shows what the camera will render. So it shows you your frame. So if I want to move my camera, I can come up here, select my camera, and same as moving anything else in here, I can move it along the Z, or I can go into Object and I can find the location and move it up along the Z axis. Okay. Some other things that I've found helpful when I go into edit mode, like if you're trying to, like for example, make this curve, you can select all of your vertices. Actually, let's make a new cylinder. So I'm going to go back into object mode. Remembering to change modes is like one of the most important things you can do, because it can get pretty tricky if you're trying to do something that doesn't work in the mode you're in. Okay, so let's say I'm trying to make the wire for this. I'm gonna make this smaller again, so we'll do 0.15. 5. Like I'm trying to make my electrode. Okay, and then I'm just gonna move this up. Well, my electrode is flexible inherently, right? So in order to make this have a flexible shape, subdividing, in my opinion, makes your life easy. And the reason why I like subdividing is because it gives you more vertexes, more points to play with. So if I go ahead and go into edit mode, and then it automatically selects everything. I still don't need the top or the bottom. Do you need all points on that circle though? Okay. Nope, we're just gonna hit all. Go back to face select. All. All I'm doing is shift clicking to unselect them. We're gonna subdivide it into 4, which means I need 3 subdivisions. I need 3 slices. So this is where things can get a little tricky. Oh, but before that, I want to show you something. So if you look at it from this perspective, yes, you can tell from the top view that this isn't in your nanopipette. But as a user, it's really hard to know that that means that it's kind of hard. So by setting a starting point like 0, 0, or having a point like that, that you can always move things to, it's really helpful. Okay. Now we're going to go back into edit mode in order to finish what I was talking about. Sorry. Okay. So I have all of these slices. So what I want to do is I want to take this section and I want to kind of turn it on its side, right? So what I would say is you want one subdivision, or you want two subdivisions per term. And the reason I say that is, well, I'll show you. So I'm going to select everything but the bottom. So this is my personal preference. I'm going Feltus. And we need to make sure that there aren't anything, there's nothing that hasn't been selected. Nope. I'm going to ask you guys this in a second, but if there's something that you want me to try and show you how to make, just let me know in the chat here in a second. Oh, this isn't perfect, but I think I might just kind of drop with it. So, okay. Yeah, and this is why this takes a really long time, which is also why I recommend if you have finer details, put them in PowerPoint, then bring them in. Okay. I'm just going to show you from the top instead. Do this. So one of the first things I do is I'll grab it, move it. So if you see how kind of like bent this looks, doesn't exactly look great. And so that's why I'll tend to use the rotate function. Uh, and so, and it's also part of why I use at least two subdivisions. So I'm going to want to move this down on the Z axis so that I have less tension on it. Going to move this on the Y axis here. Okay. So if I just grab this and pull it down, I'm kind of making everything a little less steep. So that kind of helps this curve feel a little bit more natural. So when I go into object mode and I shade it smooth, I mean, it still doesn't look perfect, but it looks, it can look better. And so I'll show you how to make it look a little bit better. So you're essentially going to kind of make this center slice the knee. That makes any sense? So you're going to pull it up into the space where the bend is. So, yeah. Try just vertexes. was trying to do everything in line mode for you guys, because I think it would probably be simpler, or I thought it would be simpler. Apparently it's not. Okay, so I'm kind of pulling this up into the knee, and then I'm going to rotate it along the x-axis. So that's where my bend is. So now I kind of have that point, and so you see how this is still kind of sharp. So we're going to bring this up. And you can kind of guide everything. You kind of want to guide everything along the same tilt. So you'll have like two different iterations of differing like kind of angle intensities. So that way it doesn't look so harsh. So anything that's kind of a non-traditional shape is quite difficult to do in this. There are simpler ways, but there's other ways. I don't know if I would qualify them as simpler. There's several ways to do most things in Blender. Oh, some kind of intro things about Blender. Blender is a like free to use software, so you can download it yourself. You don't need a university license. It is also available on OSU Software Center. So that can be quite helpful. Okay. So now let's go to object mode. And it looks maybe a little smoother. Maybe not. You can spend a lot of time trying to perfect things in here. There's also ways to like draw on objects or generate patterns. So I'll show you guys one more quick thing. So I've only shown you two of the 5 or 6 modes that we have. I've used sculpt mode. I don't like it as much as edit mode because it's harder to get fine things. Vertex paint and weight paint, I haven't necessarily had most luck with. Texture paint can be very helpful for trying to get interesting patterns. So what I did here was I went to texture paint, and then I went to textures. I added a new texture, and then I went over here to our texture tab. And so like you can add images. And then there's also sometimes there are different things. So, okay, here under base color, there are different options as well. So instead of having it just be a simple color, you can have a checker texture. You can change the size of these. You can change the color of these. So if I want it to be a less of a dark contrast, but I still want the checker pattern. You can do, I think, noise is fun. Brick texture is less fun. These are all things that I've used before to try and like emulate certain features. So that is the alternative to base color. I believe you have to add a texture in order to access this. I haven't tried it the other way yet, so that remains to be seen. But for the most part, stick to object mode and edit mode. And that is what I wanted to show you. Oh, actually, hold on, one more thing. So I like to be in camera mode before I render. This is what my image currently looks like. You'll notice there's no background. You'll notice there's very little light. And that's for 2 reasons. One, it kind of auto-generates you no space, right? And that's not what we tend to want. And then in order to have light, you need a light source. So I'll get into those in a minute. But any questions so far? Sorry, I know this is a lot. say something. Cool. Okay. Gonna get back into background and developing a background and then adding light sources. Okay. So let's start with the background because that's pretty easy. You're going to want to pick one of two things, at least in my experience. So I'm going to go back to Shift A, add. I like planes. Planes are nice. Planes are simple. You can turn it upright, turn it at a 45-degree angle so it's perpendicular to the camera. Move it backwards with my X and Y features. And then make it huge. So if you look at it, still pretty dark. We haven't picked a color yet, and there's a whole bunch of shadow on here. So if you want it to be a high intensity color, you want it to be a hue, my advice is this. Pick your color. We're going with purple because I like it. And then you're going to go to emission. So the emission color is the hue you will see. If you want to match a color, you can click this little dropper and then click the color. My advice is to do that from the base color, because if I go over here, it will show me the shaded color, and that is the hue that it's selecting. Like that is what it will emit. Even if I'm over here and I select this, it will change to that. So it's important to kind of pull for your base color if that's what you really want. Okay, so if I increase my emission, and it makes it brighter. So if I want it to kind of stay darker, do that. But it increases the intensity of the light coming from your background, which is helpful because otherwise your color is not going to translate very well to an image. Okay. At least in my experience. If you're picking an intense color, if you're doing less intense colors, it's kind of whatever. Okay. Back on the right-hand panel, we've gone through camera. We have all of these little triangles, which are different objects. But we also have a light bulb. That is our light source. So like everything, it has an object area that tells you its exact location. So if I look for it, it's this little orange guy. You can rotate it. I don't see why you would do that when the light looks like this. You can select a couple different types of lights. So if you go to the little light bulb tab, you have point, sun, spot, area. Personal favorite is area. Also, you'll notice this point light automatically populates at 1,000 watts. Now, when I go ahead and add another light, Shift A, and I go down my light tab feature here, and I add a new point light, that automatically generates at 10 watts. It does next to nothing. You need to crank this up in order for it to do anything. So just something to note. Okay. And then from here, I'm going to make my light an area light. Okay. I'm going to move it up. And move it out of the way. Okay, so you'll notice that there's this little orange box around it. And then an orange line. That orange line is the direction the light's going. The orange box is kind of like the area that intensity is spread over. You can make it bigger, but I believe that dims the light at like any given, like given off at any given point. Like it's 1,000 watts over that area, right? So I'm just going to rotate it towards my image. Generally speaking, having it kind of like oblique to the camera, etc., isn't bad. You'll notice this orange box is in my field of view in the camera. It does not render that way. You can't ever see a light source that you build when you render an image, which is nice. So there's one other thing that you can select with the light tabs, and that is shadows. So I can turn off the shadows from that light source, but I have to do that for each light source. So you can kind of keep this one because maybe you'd like how that looks. Shadows can get tricky when you provide your own background like this. I do think there's another way to get a background in here. But I have no experience with that at the moment, so I'll show you what I can do. There's also another way to do this background that I would recommend if, for example, you're doing something that's a little bit more three-dimensional than this. Maybe you have to have this in the foreground, something in the background, and it gets really hard to have just a flat box behind all of that when you want to maintain some shadows, but not all shadows. So my advice is create a cube. Make it huge. It doesn't really have to be huge. Make that there. Okay. It's kind of covering everything at the moment. Which is totally fine because we're gonna open it up. So in order to open up, we're gonna go into edit mode, and then I'm gonna go to face select. And I'm gonna select a face. I'm gonna hit X. This deletes a face, or really anything specifically that you want to select. I typically like to delete faces only. It makes life pretty easy. Now I essentially have a white studio for my image. So I went back to my camera view. You can see that the purple doesn't kind of cover everything. So I'm just going to fix that real quick. Selecting my plane. I'm still in edit mode. So notice how I want to move my plane, but it's still in a cube. It's because I'm not in object mode, so I can't change what I have selected. Just make this bigger. Let's look and see how we did. Okay, we have our nanopipette in our electrolyte, little reservoir, and a attempt at an electrode. Okay. That pretty much covers what I think you guys should know about Blender. I guess there's one more thing that I'll show you. Okay, sorry, I promise. This is the last one. Last one. This is a helpful tool. So I'm just gonna pull this on. Pull the pipette, and I'm gonna create a plane. Shift add plane. Grab, move this. So why did I just do this? Well, it's because I need an object and I need something to mirror it about. So there's this entire group of things called modifiers, which are super complicated, and the only one you probably care to know is mirror. It makes it so that you don't have to build as many things. So if you go to add modifier, generate mirror, so you want to select the object. Actually, hold on. This is mirroring the plane about that object. So I want to go out of here. Generate mirror object there. So then it will choose, you can choose to mirror it along the x-axis or the y-axis or the z-axis or just the z-axis. So like, let's say you want to build a reflection, and I can get rid of my plane. You can't see it anymore, and now I still have both things. So that can be really helpful to not have to continuously build things, or let's say you need like 4 pegs on to support your platform. You only have to build one of them. You can mirror the rest around the object that sits on top of it. So now that concludes everything I have to show for you guys. Do you guys have any questions? Or anything like that? I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. I know this was a lot. Cool. Um, if you ever want to use this as a video editing software, let me know. I also know how to do that to some effect. But otherwise, I will see you guys in a bit.